Ex-PlayStation head Shawn Layden has said the current way the industry relies on AAA games to sustain it is a death sentence, and how many titles currently feel quite stale and inviting, leading to ultimately the deaths of surefire bets like Concord. That's me adding that wider context. There's a lot of quotes here from him, with Layden speaking over at Gamescom Asia. This is written up by GamesIndustry.biz. Layden said, in the past, we spent a lot more time looking at games and not asking what's your monetization scheme, or what's your recurrent revenue plan, or what's your subscription formula. We asked the simple question, is it fun? Are we having a good time? If you said yes to those questions, you'd usually get a green light. You didn't worry so much about the end piece, for better or worse. Of course, back then you didn't make a game for millions of dollars, so your risk tolerance was fairly high. Today, the entry costs for making a AAA game are in the triple-digit millions. I think naturally risk tolerance drops, and you're looking at sequels, you're looking at copycats, because the finance guys who draw the line say, well, if Fortnite made this much money in this amount of time, my Fortnite knockoff can make this amount in that amount of time. We're seeing a collapse of creativity in games today with studio consolidation and the high cost of production. There's a lot to this and more things that he says, but he thoughts going in. Layden's been a very big advocate for prioritizing creativity over business, especially in the modern day.
He has. You know, it's funny. I liked Shawn Layden a lot when he was at PlayStation, and I don't really know what he does now, but he's always like doing interviews, which is really fun, and he's always commenting on the industry, and he often has very smart things to say, kind of like this. I think that idea of budgets getting out of hand is definitely leading to, one, a lack of creativity, and two, just games not hitting like they used to and resonating with audiences. Like Sean says there, Sean, like I'm on first name basis with him.
The lad Layden.
Like Mr. Layden is there. You know, when budgets for AAA games start to creep into three figures a minimum, that is a huge change from even 7 years ago, you know, on the last generation of consoles, where we could get something like Horizon Zero Dawn and Ghost of Tsushima, for a lot of money, but under $100 million, at least for its production budget. And now you're looking at $200 million for the sequels to both of those games, probably at minimum, maybe not even including marketing. So that has ballooned so much. And I think I always go back to like this one comment that I remember from, I think it was maybe one of the leaked internal presentations from Insomniac when they were talking about the budget around that game. And I was going to talk about Spidey too. Yeah, allegedly $300 million. And I think one of the comments, I can't remember which executive it was from, someone within Sony saying, do you see that money on the screen? Can people tell that the budget from Spider-Man 1 to Spider-Man 2 has doubled or even tripled? And I don't personally think you can. Like, you look at Horizon Zero Dawn to Forbidden West, two games that I absolutely love, but you cannot really see the increase in budget. And that's not to say that the money is being wasted or that they don't need that much money. They probably do. Just that we used to see it. We used to see it when games had opulent budgets. We used to see it in the cutscenes and the visuals and what have you. And now you don't see it. I can't explain it more than that in the same way, which makes it, you know, a harder sell to players. And in a way, it doesn't really justify the high price point, because if the average Joe can't point and say, oh, that looks bigger and it looks better than the one I played 6 years ago, then probably not going to be there day one.
There is a huge conversation around diminishing returns, like especially in the wake of the PlayStation 5 Pro, which is out in like a few weeks, and it's like that thing didn't even sell out on the official PlayStation Store. So it's not like there's a hunger to get access to that extra tier, because it's so hard to know what that extra tier even is. And yeah, like a lot of that goes hand in hand with just the way the generations roll out. Like, we grew up with the jump from Metal Gear Solid 1 to 2 or whatever it is. Spidey 2 I want to focus on for a little bit, because across the weekend it came out that Insomniac said they're not doing any DLC for the game, which was a weird thing. There was the whole Insomniac leak last year where, you know, we don't know how many of these plans are true, but there's potential of a Venom game. Like, obviously they built a whole Venom model, like there's the end of that game you play as them. So the assumption was that, well, of course there's not going to be, because there'd be a Venom spin-off thing. But there was a leaked internal chart showing Carnage DLC and a Spider-Man multiverse DLC as well. Right. That stuff's been canned. But like, the production budget was so sky high, and then you've got Tony Todd, who voiced Venom, saying that 90% of his lines weren't used. And the assumption was like, well, because he didn't realize he was making stuff for the Venom game. And so it's like, I think my whole wider point is that, like, if you're going to be playing with this much money or the production is this big, then everything needs to be locked the F down. And maybe that's just impossible at a certain level. However, you can contrast it against the way Hideo Kojima ran the first Death Stranding, where he was out there publicly saying, this is exactly how we did it. And I know that this is coming from a layman's point of view. I'm not in the gaming industry, on the coding side, on the dev side, but I have to imagine that there is a reality to how messy productions get or are allowed to get. And how that then gets in the way of creative because you're not being able to execute on the vision that you had in the first place. I think in Spidey's case, and I've thought this for years, Sony's handling of the Spidey IP is what's effing everything up.
Really?
Whether that's, I mean, it's a wider conversation, but whether that is, Tom Holland not knowing where he stands in terms of doing future sequels. He was on a recent interview again across the last few days talking about how the studio, i.e. Sony, cannot decide where the hell they want him to be. And he says he has a bit of weight now to say, we're not just doing this for the sake of doing it. I need to know what the character means. But I think Sony, because they were going up against the MCU when it was in its glory days, tried to make the Spidey universe, and they greenlit all these movies, whether that's Morbius or Venom or whatever it is. And then the games tie in, like Spidey 2 has a Spider-Verse cameo thing in it in the regular game. And then they were going to do the DLC, but they didn't do it. I think someone from the top down in the Sony side cannot decide how to handle the Spider-Man IP. And I imagine that is why they've had to cut and slice and move things around all over the place.
See, I think you're right, but also I don't agree. I think you're right in terms of the movie side of things. I think Sony's handling of the Spider-Man IP with the movies and the live action stuff has been just crap. It's just been pretty rubbish, them trying to make Madam Web a thing, them trying to make Morbius a thing.
What about Madam Web?
Yeah. They've got Kraven the Hunter, which might be all right. It's their first R-rated movie, so maybe we get something a little bit different with that. But I don't know. I wouldn't bet my house on it, put it that way. Venom worked, but I love the...
Venom's good, goofy fun.
That's it.
It works.
Quote, unquote, love the Venom movies. I don't think they're good films. If that version of Venom was in like the mainline Spider-Man movies, I'd probably be disappointed. I only cut that and Morbius and Madam Web some slack because it's very easy to push off to the side. I can say, it's not really important. It's Sony's universe. It's not the Marvel universe. But there will be a point where Sony probably has full stewardship over Spider-Man as a whole, and then I'll be worried. Yeah.
To that end, there was that bit where they got that Venom and he looked at the news report that had Tom Holland. He beamed across the multiverse and then just left again.
Literally.
What?
Yeah, we had that bit where he was in the MCU and we thought, is he going to be in No Way Home? Will he be in an Avengers movie? And then he's instantly back out. And then you've got Michael Keaton coming over to the Sony universe to talk to Morbius, and then we're never going to get a follow-up on that, probably.
Sony have no idea what they're doing, man.
They have no idea what they're doing. That said, for me, it's not a Sony issue when it comes to Spider-Man because I personally think it's not an Insomniac issue per se, but I just think that team, as big as they are, I've felt this for a while. I've liked all the games they produce, but I just think they're spreading themselves a little bit too thin. Like they have produced a consistent amount of great games over the past 4 years, but they have done a lot. We got Spider-Man, then we got Ratchet and Clank, then we got Spider-Man Remastered, then we got Miles Morales, then we got Spider-Man 2, and they have so many irons in the fire that I just think at a certain point, with all of those game releases, even though there's a huge time gap between Spidey 1 and Spidey 2 of 5 years, it doesn't feel like 5 years has gone by because it feels like that game was, I know it was probably in development that long, but it feels like there were a bunch of other projects that maybe got some focus first and then it came out. And I really love Spidey 2, but it doesn't feel like a game that was, has $300 million. It
was weirdly underwhelming
worth of production. It feels like, like you said, rushed in a lot of places, especially with the story. And it's like, well, what is going on with that? Are they thinking too far ahead? Are they cutting Tony Todd's dialogue because they want to make something else with Venom in or spin that Carnage storyline from the main game off into something else? I don't know. For me, I think that's more of a Insomniac thing than a Sony thing, just because outside of the movie universe and outside of the live action stuff, I think Spider-Man's been handled quite well.
Right.
I like Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the MCU movies. I think Insomniac are still doing great work with the IP and the characters. I think even though Spider-Man 2 was maybe a disappointment, I don't think you can discount that it's still pretty good. And Miles Morales was great and 1 was great. And then you've got obviously Into the Spider-Verse and everything that's going on well there. So I think, I'm conflicted on that front. I don't know how this has turned into a Spider-Man video, but
I'll bring it back to the...
I'll talk Spidey anytime you want.
No, same as I'll take the excuse. But yeah, it's just an example of a ballooning AAA budget that is potentially something that someone like a Shawn Layden is getting at. The idea that everything's out of control, the monetization comes first. That idea of how wider can we make this go? Obviously, that lines up a lot more with a live service, something like a Concord, which I'm always proud of when the consumer, the market actually gets together and manages to rebel against something that's like genuinely terrible, which ironically isn't necessarily Concord.
Yeah.
That game played completely fine. But still, the market is capable of rejecting stuff. Layden does make the comparison to what's happening in film and says we've come to a place where everything is blockbuster, Marvel Cinematic Universe, or it's a Sundance Award contender. The general conversation he's having is that there are only two parts to this. You're either AAA or you're indie, and there's no middle space. He says then in the center, that middle piece, which used to be something like Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep in Vermont, you can make that movie. People went to the theaters to see it, but those movies and that kind of content found a place to go. Now it goes to Netflix, it went to Amazon, to Apple Plus, or all the different streaming services. It has a place to go. And then in gaming, he says, if we're just going to rely on the blockbusters to get us through, I think that's a death sentence. In the gaming business, you have a Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, and then indie stuff. But that middle piece, the middle layer that used to be where Interplay, Gremlin, Ocean, THQ, all those companies made their money, that middle piece is gone. If you can become AAA, you can survive. Or if you do something interesting in the indie space, you could, but AA is gone. I think that's a threat to the ecosystem. He talks about the way that different companies would pitch stuff, or the way that they do pitch stuff now. He's Tencent's strategic advisor. I looked up his current term. He switched in 2022. He says, if you're going to pitch me your AA game and in the first 2 pages of your deck is your monetization and revenue subscription scheme, I'm out. Your first page has to be, this game needs to be made and here's why. I want to see that fire. I don't want to see, here's the chief accountant on the team that's going to explain the game's monetization. Layden's mind is definitely in the right place. In terms of the kind of mind that you want leading something like PlayStation. Obviously, he's not there anymore. But it does feel pretty applicable to most of the top tier titles that come out. I don't know if the live service push is ending. I feel like Helldivers booming and busting and then booming again, Concord failing. I wonder whether publishers have realized the volatility of that. Like, do you ever get the AA space to come back? I'll throw in, because I was talking about this before we were recording, but I think this year is when the AA space came back. Like Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, Space Marine 2, Helldivers 2, I would say is AA. Lies of P, RoboCop did incredibly well. Like, I would say that middle tier exists. It's just there's an issue with marketing and making sure people know that it exists. But I do think those mid-tier games are starting to come. THQ came back. Like there are ways to make it work.
I'm with you. Like, those games are definitely still around. I don't think those games are as successful as they need to be. Like, THQ came back, a bunch of those AA studios and developers and publishers came back, embraced it, bought up a loads, and then they kind of were back and then they weren't. And then whatever reason, a bunch of them just stopped selling. Of course, there are always going to be ones that we can point to that did really well. Like you said, RoboCop, Lies of P. I love Lies of P. What a game that is. But I kind of, to Shawn Layden's credit again, I do compare that to movies and how the movie space has gone, where you do have blockbusters and you do still have a mid-tier that can make a lot of money, everything everywhere all at once, like one of those a AA movie, some would say. Don't kill me for that. It comes out and it makes $100 million and it does well. It does way better than anyone expected it to. I think there are always going to be hits within that space. It pains me to say I just have seen too many failures across this past year that kind of balance out those skills that you mentioned there. So many games, like we were talking about on yesterday's podcast, that come out to like 290 players at their peak and don't sustain themselves or become cult favorites that the likes of you and I champion, but don't make enough money to justify a sequel, or even in many cases justify the studio to continue. Like, there have been so many examples this year. I look at Flintlock earlier on in the calendar year, where it comes out, it's on Game Pass, but that doesn't even help it. And then you've got rumblings going on in the studio. And I think that's happened to like as many successes there have been failures, I think. Even something like Evil West that we would champion and I think is on subscription services now. It's like, he's a cool game and 10 people will play it. And I love that they exist. I don't ever want them to go away, but I am starting to see that mentality of, well, if no one's buying them, why are people bankrolling them?
Yeah, I feel like there's been a bit more, the viability of it is there that wasn't there in years prior. Like, I feel like across the early 2020s, we're still in the early 2020s, but the very beginning of the 2020s, I feel like it was as diametrically opposed as the way like Layden's saying now. Whereas like the titles that I mentioned, like that RoboCop Rogue City, I couldn't believe how gorgeous that looked, how well it played, how authored it felt. It didn't feel like an indie game, and it didn't feel like a AAA. It was a perfect AA game. I still champion that thing so much. And Lies of P is like a perfect middle tier game. I don't want the momentum to stop there, because the assumption is you have to go bigger. Like you've got on the Ubisoft side, just plugging more missions into a game that could already release, and they're already in the AAA space. But that assumption that pure girth is how you justify the money, I just think that is in itself the capitalistic growth model incarnate.
Yeah.
That more is better kind of thing, which is exactly what Layden's saying isn't the way forward. But yeah, I feel like 2024 had those B tier gems. Dragon's Dogma 2, like you can argue that's AAA, but I think that's more of a AA game.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that are more recommendable.
I said yes, and then I like immediately thought, hang on, what's Scott saying here now?
I think that's a whole other thing, is that the definition of AAA, because there's multiplayer AAA, and I feel like there's single player AAA, and then it's like how much do people expect something to look like a Red Dead 2, a Last of Us 2, and then even them, those two titles are in a league of their own. But when they come with an associated price point and a console you need to get to play them, and they're a few years old, is the assumption now that like if you're spending that money, it needs to be that good.
Yes.
Like, it needs to at least to be up there with the Naughty Dogs, the Rockstars, and sometimes the Ubisofts or the Activisions. But I mean, I don't think so, and I think it's okay to have that middle tier. But and I see the games that support my worldview.
No,
but it is hard.
This is it, man. I agree with you. I want these games. I need them to exist. I love a game just being complete and nicely affordable and not 100 million hours in length. It's just, I annoyingly go back to the market. And it reminds me of when, if on YouTube, for instance, if we do like a passion project that we really believe in, that we're really positive about a game, and no one watches it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, everyone's saying, no, we really want
Give us more of this.
Give us more of this. And it's like, I would love to. I would love to. If it was just myself and I didn't have to think about money, I would just do that all the time.
Yeah.
But like, I kind of view it as this AA thing where you can put out something that you're proud of, something that's great. And if people aren't buying it, like that's always going to be the issue, right? And it sucks. And I wish the likes of Lies of P sold 20 million copies and proved that, this was a model that people wanted. But even though those are successes, I just don't think they are going to come close to the ceiling of success that is possible with AAA games and live service games. And I think and we've said this before, but until publishers change their priorities and view like 1 million copies sold, 2 million copies sold, 3 million copies sold as a success, that will always be viewed as a modest hit at best, or maybe just like a complete write-off at worst, which is such a shame because, like you said, that the difference between a success and a flop now, it's so stark. Like you need to recoup these budgets, and that's really, really hard to do. And we're also seeing that if a game doesn't hit, it really doesn't hit. It's not like something can come out and be all right and guarantee 2 million sales at the minimum now. It's like something can come out like a Concord and guarantee 10,000 peak players.
That's the overall thing, is the publisher mentality, which I guess is someone like a Layden is talking in a way that you would like to see applied to other companies. But yeah, it's changing the goalposts. And we saw some of it from Ubisoft shareholder meetings where they have shareholders saying, why can't you just release the game now? Why can't you just release it early? Like that general idea of trying to please the money men, trying to please the people who are doing the stack crunching and don't care about the creativity side until they need to. It is changing that stuff. I'm glad someone like a Layden getting out there and talking about it so openly is hopefully going to mean something.